The Bluestocking's Christmas Scandal, written by Violet Sinclair, narrated by Isadora Blythe. Chapter 1, December 22nd, 1823, Rothbury Abbey. Lady Harriet Pemberton was, quite simply, decorative. Like the Sevres vases flanking the mantelpiece or the oriental screens in the blue salon, she served an aesthetic purpose. She was displayed at appropriate times, rotated through social events seasonally, and carefully maintained to preserve her value. Today, she was being displayed on the frozen pond behind Rothbury Abbey, wearing a fetching blue pelisse trimmed with white fur that her mother assured her brought out her eyes. Not that anyone cared what color her eyes were, as long as they remained appropriately vacant and admiring when gentlemen spoke. "Lady Harriet, come join us." Lady Sophia Sterling called from the center of the pond, where she skated near that American artist, Mr. Livingston. There was something charged in the air between them, though both were maintaining careful propriety. Harriet arranged her face into its practiced expression of delighted incomprehension. "Oh, I couldn't possibly. I shall simply watch. You all look so graceful." What she wanted to say was that the ice appeared unevenly frozen toward the eastern edge, where the spring fed into the pond, and that yesterday's brief thaw followed by last night's hard freeze had likely created dangerous weak spots that should be marked. But Ornaments didn't understand ice formation based on weather patterns. Ornaments giggled and clapped and said things like, "How marvelous!" and "What fun!" and never ever demonstrated they'd observed anything more complex than the color of someone's gown. "Don't be silly," Diana, Duchess of Rothbury, glided over with infuriating elegance. "The ice is perfectly safe, and everyone should enjoy the afternoon while the weather holds." Harriet glanced toward the library windows where she'd noticed that American educator, Miss Mitchell, deep in conversation with Lord Harrington, another pair circling each other with careful interest. The Christmas house party was proving quite educational for several guests. "You're too kind, Your Grace," Harriet simpered, allowing herself to be led onto the ice. "Though I'm dreadfully clumsy. I hope I don't embarrass myself." She wasn't clumsy. She'd read enough about balance and movement in her medical texts to understand how weight distribution worked. She knew exactly how to. "Lady Harriet, how delightful you look!" Lord Henley appeared at her elbow, his eager face flushed with cold and obvious infatuation. "Might I assist you? These skating endeavors can be quite challenging for delicate ladies." Delicate. If she had a penny for every time someone called her delicate, she could fund her own lending library. Hidden, of course, secret, like everything real about her. "You're too kind, Lord Henley," she cooed, taking his arm while internally wishing she could explain that women weren't inherently more fragile than men. It was corsets and lack of physical activity that created the illusion of frailty. But then Sophia laughed, really laughed, not the tinkling society laugh, but a genuine burst of joy, as Jacob steadied her after a wobble. The pair looked so natural together, as if they were discovering something wonderful. Harriet felt something crack in her chest. When had she last laughed like that? When had she last been herself for more than stolen moments with hidden books? The answer was never. She'd been an ornament since the day she turned 16, and her mother explained that clever girls became spinsters while pretty fools became duchesses. "I say, Lady Harriet, you're quite accomplished at this," Lord Henley exclaimed, as she executed a steady glide. Accomplished. She wanted to scream. She could read Latin medical terminology, identified dozens of medicinal herbs, and had secretly studied anatomical drawings that would horrify every matron in England, but her accomplishment was not falling on ice. "Oh," she gasped, affecting a wobble. "I'm so unsteady." "Never fear, I shall protect you." And that's when everything went wrong. Lord Henley, in his eagerness to be gallant, pulled her sharply toward him just as she was shifting her weight. The combination of his momentum and that suspicious eastern ice she'd noticed earlier all conspired against her. She felt her ankle turn, heard the small pop that meant ligament strain, and experienced a moment of perfect clarity about the likely medical implications before the pain hit. Oh, this time the gasp was real. She crumpled, barely catching herself before hitting the ice face first. "Lady Harriet," multiple voices called out as skaters rushed toward her. My ankle, she managed, her mind automatically cataloging symptoms. Sharp pain, immediate swelling beginning, likely sprain given the angle of impact. Someone fetch the doctor, Diana commanded. I'll go. Lord Henley scrambled up, all heroic determination. Dr. Morrison will know what to do. Harriet bit back the urge to point out that Dr. Morrison was 70 if he was a day, half-blind, and still believed in bleeding for ailments that required rest and cold application. Jacob Livingston and Lord Harrington carefully lifted her between them, carrying her toward the house while her mother fluttered alongside, making unhelpful noises about her poor, delicate flower and the dangers of winter activities. They deposited her on the sofa in the morning room, and Harriet caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, cheeks flushed, hair disheveled, ankle already swelling visibly through her stocking. She looked ridiculous, and for once, she didn't care. The doctor will be here shortly, Lord Henley announced, rushing back in. Though it's not Dr. Morrison. His nephew has taken over the practice while the old doctor recovers from his own injury. Dr. Pat Ashford, I believe. His nephew? Diana asked. I hadn't heard. The morning room door opened, and Harriet's world tilted on its axis. The man who entered was not the elderly, doddering physician she'd expected. Dr. Ashford appeared to be perhaps 30, with dark hair that needed cutting, intelligent hazel eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and shoulders that suggested physical labor rather than a life of leisure. He was, in short, completely inappropriate. Working class, professional rather than leisured. Everything her mother had taught her to look past as if it didn't exist. He was also the most attractive man she'd ever seen. Your Grace, he said, bowing efficiently to Diana before his gaze found Harriet. I understand we have an injury? My ankle, Harriet managed, remembering to add a tremulous quality to her voice. It's quite painful. He moved toward her with confident purpose, setting down his medical bag. May I examine it? Her mother gasped. Surely that's not a young man, my daughter's ankle. Mother, Harriet interrupted, then caught herself and added a whimper. Please, it hurts dreadfully. Dr. Ashford knelt beside the sofa, his hands hovering near her foot. I'll need to remove your boot and stocking to properly assess the damage. With your permission? Their eyes met, and Harriet felt something electric pass between them. His hands looked capable, strong, with a light dusting of dark hair on his forearms where his sleeves were rolled back. Completely inappropriate. Absolutely fascinating. Yes, she breathed. His fingers were gentle but sure as he unlaced her boot, and Harriet had to bite her lip, not from pain, but from the shocking intimacy of a stranger's hands on her ankle. He carefully peeled down her stocking, and she heard her mother make a strangled sound. He murmured, his fingers delicately probing the swollen joint. Can you move it at all? She attempted a small rotation, wincing. A little. Good. That suggests a sprain rather than a fracture. His fingers continued their examination, and Harriet found herself mesmerized by his concentration, the way his brow furrowed slightly as he worked. The ligament is strained but intact. You'll need to rest it completely for several days. Several days? Her mother's voice rose. But we're to return to London after Christmas. I'm afraid that's inadvisable, Dr. Ashford said firmly. Moving her too soon could worsen the injury significantly. Harriet bit back a smile. Several more days at Rothbury Abbey. Several more days away from the endless parade of morning calls and mindless conversation. Several more days of the doctor checking on her injury. I'll need to wrap it, he said, pulling bandages from his bag. And I'll return tomorrow to assess the healing. As he wound the bandage around her ankle with practiced efficiency, Harriet found herself studying his face. There was intelligence there, keen observation that reminded her of the medical texts she secretly devoured. When he glanced up and caught her staring, she quickly arranged her features into vacant sweetness. You're very kind, doctor, she simpered, though I don't understand all these medical things. It's all so complicated. Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment? Before he nodded. Of course, simply remember, complete rest, keep it elevated, and apply cold compresses to reduce the swelling. Cold compresses, she repeated dutifully, as if the concept was foreign rather than basic treatment she'd read about in her hidden copy of domestic medicine. He stood, packing his bag efficiently. I'll return tomorrow morning to check your progress. After he left, Harriet lay back on the sofa, her ankle throbbing and her mind racing. Dr. Ashford's hands had been so gentle, so sure, the way he'd looked at her as if expecting something more than vapid agreement. Well, her mother sniffed. At least he was quick about it. Though really, sending such a young man to attend a lady's injury, most inappropriate. Inappropriate. Yes, everything about Dr. Ashford was inappropriate, which was why Harriet was already planning to be much, much worse tomorrow. After all, a sprained ankle could be dreadfully slow to heal, especially if one had reasons to prolong the recovery. She thought of Sophia's natural laughter as she'd skated with Mr. Livingston, the possibility of being truly seen rather than merely displayed. Then she thought of Dr. Ashford's intelligent eyes, the gentle competence of his hands. Perhaps it was time for this ornament to stop being quite so decorative. Perhaps it was time to be human instead. Chapter 2. Dr. Simon Ashford had delivered his fair share of babies, set broken bones in farmyard accidents, and once extracted a toy soldier from young Tommy Fletcher's nose. But nothing in his medical training had prepared him for the particular torture of treating spoiled society ladies. He knocked on the morning room door, medical bag in hand, already dreading the encounter ahead. Lady Harriet Pemberton had been precisely what he'd expected yesterday. Beautiful, helpless, and possessed of exactly as much intelligence as her expensive gown suggested, which was to say, none at all. "Come in," a melodious voice called. Simon entered to find his patient arranged on the sofa like a tableau from a lady's magazine. Her golden hair was perfectly coiffed despite her supposed infirmity. Her morning dress was an artful shade of rose that complemented her complexion, and she held a book in her lap. Upside down, he noted with grim satisfaction. "Dr. Ashford!" She clasped her hands together with theatrical delight. "How kind of you to call. I do hope you're well. Such dreadful weather we've been having, haven't we? Though I suppose it's quite seasonal for December." Simon bit back a sigh. Weather. Of course they'd start with weather. Every conversation with these ornamental creatures began the same way, vapid observations about topics requiring no thought whatsoever. "Good morning, Lady Harriet." He set down his bag with more force than necessary. "How are you feeling today?" "Oh, much better, though perhaps a tiny bit tender still." She touched her ankle delicately, as if it might shatter. "But I mustn't complain. Mama always says complaining is most unbecoming in a lady." Naturally, God forbid a woman express genuine discomfort when she could simper instead. "May I examine it?" "Of course. Though I must say your medical bag is quite fascinating, all those mysterious instruments and bottles. Do you enjoy being a doctor? It must be such rewarding work, helping people feel better." The bright, empty enthusiasm in her voice made his teeth ache. Simon knelt beside the sofa and began unwrapping the bandage, trying not to notice how her skin seemed to glow in the morning light, or how her ankle was actually quite elegantly shaped. Physical beauty meant nothing when paired with an empty head. "The profession has its challenges," he said curtly, probing the joint. The swelling had reduced significantly, more than he'd expected for a genuine sprain of the severity she'd claimed. "Oh, I'm sure it must, meeting so many different people, though I suppose some are more pleasant than others." She laughed, a tinkling sound that probably drove every man in London to distraction. "I do so admire people with professions. So industrious, so useful, as if work were some quaint hobby rather than a necessity for people who hadn't been born into cushioned privilege." Indeed, Simon tested the range of motion, noting she barely winced. Curious. "Can you flex your foot, please?" "Oh, like this?" She moved it easily, then immediately gasped. "Oh my, that does smart a bit." The gasp came a full second after the movement. Either her pain responses were remarkably delayed or she was performing for his benefit. He murmured, making a show of examining closely while his irritation mounted. Did she think him incompetent? Some country doctor easily fooled by a pretty face and theatrical moans? "Is it healing well?" she asked anxiously. "I do so hope I haven't done anything to worsen it. Mama says I'm dreadfully clumsy, though I try so hard to be careful." "It appears to be progressing." Simon began rewrapping the bandage with efficient movements, though perhaps faster than one might expect. Was that a flicker of something sharp in her blue eyes? No, she was back to vapid sweetness before he could be certain. Oh, how wonderful. I do heal quite quickly, or so I've been told. Good breeding, perhaps? Papa always says our family has excellent constitution, though of course I know nothing about such medical matters. It's all quite beyond me. Nothing about medical matters, right? Then why had she correctly identified it as a sprain yesterday before he'd even examined it? Most ladies would have been shrieking about broken bones and permanent disfigurement. Simon finished the bandage and stood, studying her carefully. Lady Harriet, I need to ask, are you experiencing any actual pain at this moment? Oh, she blinked at him with doe-like innocence. Well, perhaps just a tiny bit of discomfort? Nothing I can't bear, of course. I wouldn't want to be a bother. Because in my professional opinion, an injury of this nature should still be causing significant discomfort, if genuine. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Simon watched color rise in her cheeks, embarrassment, guilt, or simple feminine outrage at being questioned. I'm sure I don't understand what you're implying, she said, her voice still sweet but carrying a cooler undertone. I'm implying that you may be exaggerating your symptoms, perhaps for attention or to extend your stay at Rothbury Abbey. Simon packed his instruments with sharp movements. It's more common than you might think among young ladies of leisure. Young ladies of leisure? Her spine straightened, and for a moment she looked almost formidable. Then she melted back into helpless confusion. I'm afraid I still don't understand. Are you saying I'm lying? I'm saying your injury appears to have healed remarkably well, perhaps too well for someone claiming continued debilitation. But surely you must know better than I. She gazed up at him with wide, trusting eyes. I'm just a silly girl who knows nothing about medicine. If you think it's healed, then it must be so. The innocent act was beginning to fray at the edges. Simon could see tension in her jaw, a brightness in her eyes that suggested suppressed temper rather than vapid agreement. Indeed, which raises the question of why you continue to claim infirmity when you're clearly well enough to. Perhaps, Lady Harriet said, her voice taking on a crystalline quality that made the hairs on his arms stand up, it's because the lateral ligaments require significantly longer to heal than you apparently learned in whatever medical training you received. Simon's medical bag slipped from his hands. She continued with ruthless precision. The continued pain originates from the fibular collateral ligament, which was stretched during the inversion injury. While superficial swelling reduces quickly, the underlying tissue damage requires proper time for healing, as any competent physician should know. You, Simon struggled for words, how do you know anatomical terms? Furthermore, Lady Harriet said, rising gracefully from the sofa, if you had bothered to examine the injury properly, instead of assuming I was some empty-headed creature seeking attention, you might have detected the continued instability yourself. The transformation was stunning. Gone was the helpless society ornament, replaced by a woman whose eyes blazed with intelligence and whose posture radiated confidence. She was magnificent. She was also absolutely furious. You were acting, he said stupidly. I was being proper, as I've been taught since childhood. She moved closer, and Simon caught a whiff of lavender and something sharper. Ink, perhaps. Did you enjoy my performance? All that charming prattle about weather and how wonderful you are? The helpless gasps and grateful simpering? Simon's face burned. You thought I was an idiot, a useless ornament wasting your valuable time. Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. And I obliged you perfectly, didn't I? The worst part was that she was absolutely right. He had dismissed her, had assumed her beauty meant brainlessness, had let his prejudices about her class blind him to what was directly in front of him. Lady Harriet. Oh no, doctor, I think we're quite finished here. She took a decisive step toward the door and immediately cried out, crumpling as her ankle gave way beneath her. Simon lunged forward instinctively, catching her before she hit the floor. For a moment, she was pressed against his chest, her hands gripping his shoulders, her face tilted up toward his. Her eyes were wide with genuine pain now, all pretense stripped away. Damn, she whispered, and even through his shock at her language, Simon registered that the curse held more frustration than surprise. Easy, he murmured, helping her back to the sofa. Despite his anger, his hands were gentle as he supported her weight. "Put your weight on me." She was trembling slightly as she settled back onto the cushions, her face pale. "Well," she said with forced lightness, "I suppose that proves your point about my miraculous recovery." "No," Simon said quietly, kneeling to examine her ankle again, this time with proper care. "It proves yours." The joint was definitely unstable. He could feel it now that he was looking for the right signs instead of dismissing her as a malingerer. The ligament damage was exactly as she'd described, requiring days more rest for proper healing. She'd been right, medically, anatomically, completely right, and he'd been an arrogant fool. "I should apologize," he began. "Don't." Her voice was arctic. "Please just finish your examination and go." Simon completed his assessment in silence, acutely aware of the tension radiating from her. When he finished rewrapping the ankle, properly this time, he stood and moved toward his medical bag. That's when he saw the book. It lay open on the side table where she'd set it when he'd arrived, not upside down at all, but clearly readable from where she'd been sitting. Culpepper's Complete Herbal and English Physician Enlarged. The margins were filled with notes in a feminine hand, corrections and observations that showed genuine understanding. This wasn't some fashionable lady's token interest in botanical drawing. This was serious study. Simon picked up the volume, flipping through pages covered in detailed annotations, cross-references to modern remedies, critiques of outdated practices, observations about plant preparations that showed sophisticated knowledge of medicine. "How long have you been studying?" he asked quietly. "Put that down." Her voice was deadly calm. "Some of these notes reference texts that aren't even available to most physicians." I said, "Put it down." Simon looked up to find her watching him with the expression of someone who'd been caught in their most private secret. For the first time since he'd arrived, she looked genuinely vulnerable. "You've made your opinion of my intelligence quite clear, Dr. Ashford," she said with quiet dignity. "There's no need to mock my attempts at learning as well." Mock her? He was stunned by the depth of knowledge represented in these margins. This wasn't idle curiosity. This was the work of someone with genuine passion for medicine. Someone who clearly knew more about anatomy than she'd initially let on. Someone who'd been forced to hide that knowledge behind empty prattle about weather. Someone he'd just accused of lying and attention-seeking. The full weight of his misjudgment crashed over him. She hadn't been playing games or seeking attention. She'd been trying to be what society expected, the perfect empty-headed ornament, while hiding intelligence that would have made her a pariah in her world, and he'd punished her for both the deception and the truth. "Lady Harriet." "Please leave." She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on her hands folded in her lap. "I'm sure you have other patients who actually require your expertise." The dismissal was absolute. Simon closed the herbal and set it carefully back on the table, then collected his medical supplies with movements that felt clumsy and loud in the sudden silence. At the door, he paused. "Your ankle does need continued rest, despite what I said earlier." "Of course it does." When her voice was barely audible, "I told you exactly what was wrong with it." Simon left without another word, but the quiet dignity in her voice followed him all the way to his horse. As he rode away from Rothbury Abbey, his mind churned with fragments of the encounter, her anatomical knowledge, the careful notes in her medical texts, the way she'd hidden her intelligence behind exactly the kind of vapid conversation every other society lady specialized in. She'd been giving him what she thought he wanted, what society demanded from women of her class, and he despised her for it. Then when she'd shown her true self, her brilliant, analytical mind, he'd accused her of deception instead of recognizing the impossible position she'd been placed in. Lady Harriet Pemberton was everything he'd never known he wanted in a woman. Intelligent, educated, genuinely interested in medicine. She was also everything he should avoid. Aristocratic, wealthy, completely above his social station. And thanks to his spectacular mishandling of the situation, she quite rightly wanted nothing to do with him. Simon urged his horse faster, as if he could outrun the memory of her expression when she'd asked him to leave. Professional humiliation he could handle. But the hurt he'd seen in her eyes when she dismissed him, that was going to haunt him. He was never going back to Rothbury Abbey, never going to see Lady Harriet Pemberton again. The decision should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like the worst mistake he'd ever made. Chapter 3. Harriet stared at the closed morning room door for a full minute after Dr. Ashford's departure, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Arrogant, presumptuous, incompetent, everything that was wrong with the medical profession wrapped up in one infuriatingly handsome package. She reached for Culpepper's Complete Herbal with trembling fingers, needing the familiar comfort of its worn pages. The book fell open to a section she'd annotated extensively. Treatments for joint injuries that actually worked, unlike the bloodletting and laudanum most physicians prescribed for everything from headaches to broken bones. If she had been examining a patient with an ankle sprain, she would have asked about the mechanism of injury. She would have tested for joint stability properly. She would have listened when the patient described their symptoms instead of assuming they were lying. She certainly wouldn't have accused them of malingering simply because they were young and female. "The insufferable man," she muttered, turning pages with more force than necessary. A proper examination would have taken 30 seconds to confirm the ligament damage. But then, Dr. Simon Ashford was exactly like every other physician she'd encountered, so convinced of his own superiority that he couldn't imagine a patient might actually understand their own body. Especially not a female patient. Particularly not an aristocratic female patient who was supposed to know nothing more challenging than which fork to use for fish. Harriet had been watching male physicians bungle cases for years. Dr. Morrison had nearly killed the blacksmith's wife by insisting her severe abdominal pain was hysteria when anyone with proper training could see she had signs of internal inflammation requiring immediate attention, not laudanum and bed rest. Dr. Fleming had prescribed mercury treatments for Lady Carstairs' headaches when a simple examination would have revealed she needed spectacles. And don't even start on what they called treatment for women's monthly courses, as if half the population's normal bodily functions were diseases requiring bloodletting and purgatives. She could do better. She knew she could, if women were allowed to study medicine properly. The thought that had tormented her for years rose again, sharp and bitter as winter wind. In her secret moments, stolen hours in her father's library, careful conversations with the local herbalist, clandestine reading of medical texts ordered under false pretenses, she had imagined it. Dr. Harriet Pemberton examining patients with competence and compassion, actually listening to their concerns, treating their ailments with remedies that worked rather than the latest fashionable nonsense from London physicians who'd never touched a real patient. She would specialize in women's health. She'd decided during one particularly vivid fantasy: help mothers through difficult births, treat the feminine complaints that male doctors either dismissed or grossly misunderstood, create a practice where women could speak freely about their bodies without shame or judgment. It was a beautiful dream. It was also completely, utterly impossible. Women weren't admitted to medical schools. Women couldn't take examinations for medical licenses. Women who displayed too much anatomical knowledge were considered unwomanly at best, dangerously unnatural at worst. And women of her social class weren't supposed to work at all, let alone in a profession that required touching other people's bodies and discussing things like blood and anatomy and childbirth. Lady Harriet Pemberton, physician? The very idea would give her mother apoplexy. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, quickly closing the herbal and arranging her features into acceptable feminine resignation. "My dear," Lady Pemberton swept into the room, all fluttering concern and expensive perfume. "I've just seen that young doctor leaving. How are you feeling? I do hope he wasn't too forward in his examination." "Not at all, Mama." Harriet managed a wan smile. "He was quite proper. Quite properly incompetent, more accurately. Good. Though I must say I have concerns about his qualifications. So young, and his manners seemed rather common. Not at all like dear Dr. Morrison, who has such distinguished bearing. Dear Dr. Morrison, who was half blind and still believed that drilling holes in skulls released evil vapors. Distinguished bearing indeed. I'm sure Dr. Ashford received adequate training, Harriet said carefully. Adequate, perhaps, but not exceptional, not like the physicians we employ in London, men of breeding and education who understand how to treat ladies of quality. Lady Pemberton settled into the chair beside Harriet's sofa with obvious satisfaction at her own wisdom. This is precisely why I've always said education is wasted on females, my dear. Look at you, filling your head with all sorts of unsuitable reading when you should be focusing on accomplishments that will attract a proper husband. Yes, Mamma, a lady's constitution is far too delicate for intellectual pursuits. It's why we leave such matters to gentlemen. They have the mental fortitude to handle complex subjects without becoming overwrought. Lady Pemberton gestured toward the herbal, which Harriet had tried to hide behind a needlework basket. Really, darling, reading medical texts, it's most unseemly. What would people say? They would say I know more about medicine than half the physicians in London, Harriet thought rebelliously. They would say I could save lives instead of arranging flowers and playing pianoforte badly. You're quite right, Mamma, she said instead. I was merely curious about herb gardening. For household management, you understand. Well, that's different, I suppose. Though even household management should be left to competent staff. A lady's time is better spent on pursuits that enhance her feminine appeal. Lady Pemberton's smile was warm and completely oblivious. Lord Henley has been asking after your health most solicitously. Such a devoted young man, and so eligible. I do think he would make an excellent match. Lord Henley, who had caused her injury through clumsy gallantry and would probably faint if she mentioned anything more medically complex than smelling salts. How thoughtful of him, Harriet managed. Indeed, he's everything a young lady could want. Handsome, well-connected, and most importantly, he appreciates feminine delicacy. Not like some gentlemen who expect their wives to have opinions about everything. Lady Pemberton's expression grew pointed. You would do well to encourage his attentions, Harriet. A woman's greatest accomplishment is securing a husband who will protect her from having to think about unpleasant realities. Unpleasant realities, like disease, suffering, and the fact that competent medical care could prevent countless deaths if practitioners would just listen to their patients instead of dismissing them based on prejudice and assumption. Of course, Mamma. Excellent. Now I'll leave you to rest. Dr. Ashford did say you needed to remain quiet, didn't he? Lady Pemberton rose with a rustle of silk. Though between you and me, I suspect you're quite recovered. Young ladies heal so quickly from minor incidents. Still, a day or two more of invalidism won't hurt. It gives Lord Henley more opportunities to play the devoted suitor. After her mother left, Harriet slumped back against the sofa cushions, exhaustion weighing her down like lead blankets. This was her life. This was her future. Pretending to be delicate and empty-headed, encouraging men like Lord Henley, who admired her precisely because he believed she had no thoughts in her pretty head, watching incompetent physicians make mistakes she could correct in her sleep. She thought of Dr. Ashford's hands on her ankle, gentle despite his arrogance, skillful despite his prejudices. Those were healing hands, hands that could do the work she dreamed of. And they belonged to a man who dismissed her as a frivolous ornament the moment he'd seen her face. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. And there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. Unless Harriet sat up straighter, an idea beginning to form. Dr. Ashford had been wrong about her ankle, had made assumptions based on her appearance and class rather than proper examination. What if she could prove that? What if she could demonstrate that his methods were flawed, that a more thorough approach, the approach she would have used, would have reached accurate conclusions from the beginning? It was a dangerous idea, reckless even. She would have to reveal more of her medical knowledge, risk more of her mother's disapproval, chance more speculation about her unwomanly interests. But she might, just might, be able to show one arrogant physician that his assumptions about silly society ladies were completely wrong. And perhaps, in some small way, she could practice the medicine she'd never be allowed to study. Harriet reached for her hidden writing materials, pulled from beneath the sofa cushions, where she'd concealed them from her mother's searching eyes. If Dr. Ashford thought he'd seen the last of her, He was about to discover just how much he'd underestimated the decorative Lady Harriet Pemberton. She had a letter to write, a very educational letter. Chapter 4. Simon stared at the letter for the third time, his evening tea growing cold beside him. Lady Harriet Pemberton's elegant penmanship mocked him with its medical precision. Dr. Ashford, I write to inform you of concerning complications that have developed since your examination. The affected area shows signs of potential infection, with unusual discoloration and increased local temperature. Given your extensive commentary on the dangers of untreated joint infections, I thought you should be informed immediately. Lady Harriet Pemberton. The medical terminology was too accurate to be coincidental. She was baiting him with expertise she shouldn't possess, except she did possess it, as he'd discovered yesterday when he'd found her annotated medical texts. He crumpled the letter, then smoothed it out again. After yesterday's disaster, his accusations, her brilliant defense, his humiliating realization of his own prejudice, he'd sworn never to return to Rothbury Abbey. But if infection had genuinely set in... Blast the woman, he muttered, reaching for his medical bag. Joint infections could lead to permanent damage. His professional oath trumped his wounded pride, and she knew it. Outside, fat snowflakes had begun falling. Simon saddled his horse with sharp movements, his mind churning. She was manipulating him. He was certain of it. The question was whether she was also genuinely ill. The ride to Rothbury Abbey took him through increasingly heavy snow. Every window blazed with Christmas Eve celebration, and the sound of laughter drifted across the grounds. Carriages lined the drive. The Duchess's Christmas house party was clearly in full swing. Simon felt acutely aware of his practical riding coat among such grandeur. A country doctor arriving uninvited at a duke's Christmas party, she'd orchestrated this humiliation perfectly. A footman took his horse, eyeing Simon's medical bag. Doctor? His Grace wasn't expecting. Lady Harriet Pemberton requested immediate medical attention. The footman's eyebrows rose before he led Simon inside. Diana, Duchess of Rothbury, appeared before he'd even removed his snow-dusted coat, her face shifting from hostess charm to genuine alarm. Dr. Ashford, on Christmas Eve? Is someone? Her eyes widened. Harriet? But she seemed recovered at tea. Interesting. So Lady Harriet hadn't informed her hostess of this supposed emergency. She wrote of concerning complications, Your Grace. Oh, dear. Diana pressed a hand to her chest. She did retire early, claiming fatigue. I had no idea. You must see her immediately. They passed drawing rooms filled with elegant guests and Christmas splendor. Simon glimpsed several people he recognized, including that American artist Livingston. The contrast between the festive atmosphere and his grim mission felt surreal. She's been keeping to her room since the injury, Diana explained as they climbed the stairs, though she insisted it was merely proper rest. They paused outside a door decorated with a winter rose wreath. Diana knocked. Harriet, Dr. Ashford is here. Come in. The voice from within sounded genuinely weak. Simon entered to find Lady Harriet on a chaise by the fireplace, a vision of calculated fragility. She wore a white nightgown under a burgundy wrapper, her golden hair loose around her shoulders, proper enough for a sick room but intimate enough to be unsettling. She was also pale as parchment, with shadows under her eyes he could have sworn weren't there yesterday. Dr. Ashford? Her voice carried perfect notes of grateful relief. Thank you for coming so quickly. I do apologize for the inconvenience, especially on Christmas Eve. What symptoms are you experiencing? Simon kept his voice professionally neutral while studying her. The pallor could be rice powder, the shadows could be carefully applied cosmetics, or they could be real. Increased pain, particularly here. She gestured to her ankle with a delicate hand that trembled slightly. And the skin has developed an unusual warmth. There's a throbbing quality that matches my pulse. Textbook description of infection. Too textbook. May I examine it? Of course. She extended her foot with careful movements. Simon knelt beside the chaise, acutely aware of Diana hovering in the doorway. His fingers found genuine heat in the joint, definite swelling that hadn't been there yesterday. But as he manipulated the ankle gently, testing range of motion, he caught something in Lady Harriet's expression, a flash of satisfaction quickly hidden. The swelling has increased, he admitted. It had, though whether from infection or deliberate aggravation was impossible to determine. "Is it serious?" Diana asked anxiously. Before Simon could answer, Lady Harriet spoke with perfect innocent concern. "I did notice the discoloration has a rather sunset quality, reddish fading to yellow at the edges. Is that significant?" She was describing bruising patterns with medical precision while maintaining complete naivety. Simon met her eyes and found them sharp with intelligence and challenge. "It could indicate several things," he said carefully. "I'll need to monitor the progression." "Oh," Diana exclaimed. "Then you must stay, doctor, at least through the evening, surely?" Simon turned to protest, but Diana was already calculating. "It's Christmas Eve, and look at that snow. The roads will be treacherous soon. You simply must join us for dinner. We can have a room prepared." "Your Grace, that's not necessary." "Nonsense. I won't have you traveling in a blizzard after attending to dear Harriet. Besides," Diana's smile turned slightly mischievous, "we have quite the interesting party assembled. I'm sure they'd enjoy your company." Lady Harriet made a small sound, distress or amusement, Simon couldn't tell. "I'm hardly dressed for." "Oh, that's easily managed. Mr. Sears brought extensive wardrobe. He's about your height. I'm sure he'd be happy to loan appropriate attire." Simon realized he'd been thoroughly outmaneuvered. Between Lady Harriet's performance and the Duchess's determined hospitality, he was trapped. "That's very kind," he said stiffly. "Wonderful." Diana clapped. "I'll have Thompson prepare the green room. Harriet, dear, do you think you might join us for dinner if you're feeling improved?" "Perhaps," Lady Harriet murmured, managing to look both brave and fragile. "If Dr. Ashford thinks it advisable." "Rest for now," Simon said, playing his part in this elaborate charade. "I'll check on you again before dinner." As Diana led him away, chattering about the evening's festivities, Simon caught Lady Harriet's expression in the mirror. Pure triumph mixed with something else. Anticipation, whatever game she was playing, it was only beginning. The green room lived up to its name, decorated in forest hues that reminded Simon uncomfortably of Lady Harriet's eyes when she was plotting something. The borrowed evening clothes fit well enough, though wearing another man's finery made him feel like an imposter. He could hear the party gathering below, laughter, music, the sounds of people who belonged in such settings. Simon tugged at the unfamiliar cravat and wondered what Lady Harriet hoped to gain from this elaborate torture. When he entered the drawing room, Diana immediately swept him into introductions. American heiresses, British aristocrats, and surprisingly, that educational reformer Miss Mitchell he'd heard about. She engaged him in genuinely interesting conversation about public health initiatives until dinner was announced. Simon was seated between Miss Mitchell and Lord Harrington, with whom he'd had positive dealings before. The conversation flowed easily enough, though he found himself watching the door. When Lady Harriet appeared, he nearly choked on his wine. She'd transformed completely. The pale invalid had become a vision in emerald silk that made her eyes appear almost supernatural. Her hair was elegantly arranged, her color perfect, and she moved with only the slightest favoring of her ankle as a footman escorted her. "Harriet, darling," Diana rose. "Should you be walking? Dr. Ashford said I shouldn't put weight on my ankle." Lady Harriet replied, her gaze finding his across the room. "And as you can see, James is bearing most of my weight. I couldn't possibly miss Christmas Eve dinner." She was radiant, absolutely infuriatingly radiant. No trace of the wan invalid remained. "I wouldn't dream of depriving you of Christmas dinner," Simon said carefully, "though I hope you're not overexerting yourself." "Oh, I'm being terribly careful," she assured him with wide, innocent eyes that sparkled with mischief. "I would hate to suffer a relapse after your excellent care." She was seated at the far end of the table, but Simon felt her presence throughout dinner. Every time medical topics arose, and they did, frequently with several physicians present, she would make seemingly naive observations that were medically astute. She was showing off her knowledge while maintaining perfect propriety, and only he understood the game. As the meal concluded, the Duke stood with theatrical flair. "Ladies and gentlemen, might I suggest we retire to the Great Hall? It's Christmas Eve, after all, and tradition demands ghost stories by the fire." Excited murmurs ran through the party. As guests rose to relocate, Simon noticed Lady Harriet's small smile of satisfaction. "You're in for a treat, Dr. Ashford," Lord Harrington said jovially. "Rothbury's ghost stories are legendary. Last year he had Lady Whitcomb in genuine tears with the tale of the weeping bride." As they moved toward the great hall, Simon found himself beside Lady Harriet in the corridor. "Enjoying your evening, Doctor?" she asked softly, her tone perfectly polite. "Immensely," he replied with equal politeness. "Your recovery has been remarkable." "How kind of you to notice." She smiled up at him, and for a moment the anger between them transformed into something else entirely, something that made his breath catch. "Harriet," Diana called, "come, we've saved you the best seat." The great hall was magnificent, decorated with evergreen boughs and hundreds of candles. A massive fire roared in the ancient fireplace, and chairs had been arranged in a semicircle around the Duke's position. "Now then," the Duke began with dramatic flair, "it's tradition on Christmas Eve to share tales of Rothbury's many spirits. But tonight, given our distinguished medical guest," he gestured towards Simon with a grin, "I must tell you about the Christmas doctor." Simon's stomach dropped. Lady Harriet's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. She'd known this was coming. "In 1723, the Duke continued, a terrible snowstorm struck on Christmas Eve, trapping a young physician who'd been summoned to treat the Duke's daughter. The doctor examined her, declared her ailment trivial, and joined the Christmas festivities." The Duke's voice dropped ominously, but as midnight approached, the girl's condition worsened dramatically. The doctor, deep in his cups from Christmas wine, failed to respond quickly enough. By dawn, she was dead. Gasps rippled through the audience. Simon felt his jaw tighten. The physician, overcome with guilt, hanged himself from these very rafters. The Duke pointed upward dramatically. "And now, whenever a doctor is called to Rothbury Abbey on Christmas Eve, his ghost appears to whisper warnings. Check again, look deeper, trust nothing you see." The Duke's eyes found Simon with obvious amusement. "So, Dr. Ashford, beware. The Christmas doctor walks tonight. Best not treat any young ladies, or you might find yourself with an eternal colleague." Nervous laughter filled the hall. Simon forced a smile, while several guests teased him about the coincidence. "How fascinating," Lady Harriet said clearly. "One wonders if the ghost appears to incompetent physicians only, or if he haunts all medical men who dare treat ladies at Rothbury." The challenge in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. "Perhaps," Simon replied evenly, "he only appears to physicians who've been deceived about the true nature of their patient's condition." Their eyes locked across the fire-lit space, and the air between them crackled with tension that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the heat building between them. The wind howled outside, snow pelting the windows with increasing force. They were trapped here together, by storm, by scheme, by something neither seemed willing to name. "Well," the Duke laughed, oblivious to the undercurrents, "let's hope our good doctor has better luck than his predecessor. Now, who wants to hear about the headless horseman of Rothbury Bridge?" But Simon wasn't listening. He was watching Lady Harriet, whose satisfied smile suggested this evening was unfolding exactly as she'd planned. The question was, what came next in her elaborate game? And why did he find himself eager to find out? Chapter 5. Harriet watched the firelight play across Dr. Ashford's face as Gabriel launched into his second ghost story. Something about a headless horseman that had half the ladies clutching their shawls. But she wasn't listening. She was too aware of how the doctor's jaw had tightened during the Christmas doctor tale, how his fingers had clenched against his thigh when Gabriel had pointed to those supposedly fatal rafters. Good. Let him squirm. The wind howled louder, rattling the ancient windows. Snow was building on the sills at an alarming rate, far worse than the gentle Christmas dusting she'd anticipated when writing that letter this morning. A footman entered during Gabriel's dramatic pause, whispering urgently to Diana. The Duchess's face shifted from polite attention to genuine concern. "I'm afraid I must interrupt," Diana announced, rising gracefully. "Thompson informs me the storm has become quite severe. The roads are already impassable, and the snow shows no signs of stopping." Excited murmurs ran through the guests. Lady Whitcomb actually clapped with delight. "A proper country Christmas! How marvelous!" "Indeed," Diana agreed, though Harriet could see her mentally calculating provisions and bedchambers. We'll be delighted to have you all as our guests for the next several days. Thompson, please ensure the green room is prepared for a longer stay than originally anticipated. Dr. Ashford will need additional provisions if he's to be with us through the storm. Several days. Harriet's careful plan, summon him, torment him, send him away humiliated, had just become something far more dangerous. She'd be trapped with him, close to him, for days. How fortunate the good doctor was already here, Lord Henley observed with typical obtuseness. Imagine being caught on the roads in this weather. Yes, Simon said, his eyes finding Harriet's across the circle. How very fortunate Lady Harriet's condition required immediate attention tonight. The irony in his tone was sharp as a scalpel. She lifted her chin, refusing to show that the thought of days in his presence made her pulse race with something that was definitely anger. Definitely. After Gabriel concluded his tales with a theatrical bow, guests began dispersing to their chambers. The lateness of the hour and the wine had everyone moving with lazy contentment. James appeared to assist Harriet, and she made appropriate sounds of discomfort as she rose, though her ankle barely twinged anymore. Lady Harriet, Dr. Ashford's voice stopped her at the staircase. A word about your treatment. Her mother, already halfway up the stairs, waved dismissively. Don't keep her standing too long, doctor. The child needs rest. They waited until her mother disappeared down the corridor. James shifted uncertainly. You may go, Harriet told the footman. Dr. Ashford will ensure I reach my chambers safely. My lady, I shouldn't. That will be all, James. After the footman reluctantly departed, they stood alone in the flickering light of the wall sconces. The sounds of the house settling for the night surrounded them. Distant footsteps, doors closing, the ancient building creaking against the storm. Your recovery continues to be remarkable, Simon said quietly, almost as remarkable as your talent for deception. If you're going to accuse me of something, doctor, do try to be original. Your diagnostic skills have already proven questionable. His eyes flashed dangerously. My diagnostic skills were hampered by a patient who couldn't decide if she was dying or dancing. Perhaps if you'd listened to the patient instead of dismissing her. Perhaps if the patient had been honest instead of performing. Performing? She stepped toward him, fury overriding sense. You want honesty? Fine. The binding marks on my ankle are from this morning. The symptoms I described were textbook perfect because I've read every medical text I could acquire. And yes, I orchestrated this entire evening to humiliate you. Finally, some truth. He moved closer, matching her step until they were nearly chest to chest in the narrow corridor. Though you've failed spectacularly at humiliation. Have I? Her voice dropped to something dangerous. The night is still young, doctor. They stood facing each other like duelists, both breathing hard from anger and something else, something that made her acutely aware of his height, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his evening clothes did nothing to disguise his strength. You think you're so clever, he said, voice low and rough, summoning me here, playing your games, but you've miscalculated. Oh, you're trapped here with me now, for days. His smile was sharp. And I'm a very quick study, Lady Harriet. Your next deception won't be nearly so successful. She laughed, the sound bitter and bright. You think one moment of honesty means you know me? You know nothing. She tried to push past him, but he didn't move, and the motion brought them even closer. Her hand ended up pressed against his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat racing beneath her palm. His breath stirred the loose curl by her ear. Then educate me, he challenged, his voice barely above a whisper. For one insane moment, standing there in the dim corridor with her hand on his chest and his eyes boring into hers, Harriet wanted to do something completely inadvisable. Like grab his cravat and pull him down to her level. Like find out if his mouth was as firm as it looked. Like voices from below broke the spell. Harriet jerked back so quickly that her ankle, already stressed from the binding, gave way completely. She would have fallen if Simon hadn't caught her, his arms going around her waist, pulling her against him to steady her. Damn you, she gasped, mortified by her body's betrayal. Language, Lady Harriet, he said, but his voice was strained, and his hands on her waist were perhaps gripping a bit tighter than medically necessary. Let go of me. Can you stand? I. She tried to put weight on the ankle and couldn't suppress a genuine whimper of pain. Without asking permission, he swept her up into his arms. The motion was so sudden, so presumptuous, that she actually squeaked, a sound she'd deny making until her dying day. "Put me down this instant?" "No." He started walking toward her chambers as if carrying furious aristocratic ladies was part of his daily routine. "This is kidnapping. This is medical treatment. I'll scream. Go ahead. Explain to everyone why you're in my arms in a darkened corridor." She wanted to hit him. She wanted to struggle. She wanted to ignore how solid his chest felt, how easily he carried her, how his cologne made her want to bury her face in his neck and inhale. God, what was wrong with her? He shouldered open her door and deposited her on the settee by the fire with less gentleness than before, as if he too was angry about the entire situation. "Your ankle needs proper binding," he said curtly. "Then bind it and get out." He knelt by the settee, his hands moving to her ankle with clinical efficiency, but she noticed his fingers trembled slightly as he unwound her evening slipper's ribbon. The skin-to-skin contact as he examined the joint made her breath catch. "You've genuinely injured it worse," he muttered, sounding personally offended by this fact. "Your binding trick has caused actual damage. How terrible. I suppose you'll have to actually treat me properly this time." His hands stilled on her ankle. "You're enjoying this. Immensely. You're impossible. You're insufferable. You're the most frustrating woman I've ever met. Good." He looked up at her then, and the expression on his face made her stomach flip. Exasperation mixed with something hotter, more dangerous. "This isn't over," he said, standing abruptly. "You keep saying that. Because you keep escalating. Maybe I like watching you struggle to keep up." He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "Brilliant women are always the most dangerous," he said without turning around. "Someone should have warned me." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with a genuinely throbbing ankle and a body humming with frustrated energy. Harriet glared at the closed door, her hands clenched into fists. How dare he carry her like some sort of caveman? How dare he touch her ankle with those gentle, competent hands? How dare he look at her like he wanted to either strangle her or kiss her senseless? And how dare her traitorous body want him to do the latter? Through the wall, she heard him moving in the green room. Sharp, agitated movements, a chair scraping, something hitting a surface with unnecessary force. Good, she hoped he was as unsettled as she was. She'd wanted to torment him, to prove her superiority, to put him in his place. Instead, she discovered something far more disturbing. Dr. Simon Ashford didn't intimidate easily. Worse, he seemed to see her games as a challenge to be met rather than an insult to be endured. And worst of all, part of her was thrilled by it. Tomorrow was Christmas Day. The storm showed no signs of abating. She would have to face him again, match wits with him again, pretend her pulse didn't race every time he got too close. She'd orchestrated a trap, all right. She just hadn't realized she'd be caught in it too. Harriet reached for her journal, needing to strategize her next move. This was war, and she intended to win. The fact that her enemy had strong hands and dark eyes that saw too much was irrelevant, completely, utterly irrelevant. She ignored the fact that she'd written his name 3 times in the margin before catching herself. Tomorrow, she would regain control. Tomorrow, she would show Dr. Simon Ashford exactly who he was dealing with. Tonight, however, she would allow herself 5 minutes, just 5, to think about how his hands had felt on her waist. Then she would go back to hating him. Definitely hating him. The alternative was unthinkable. Chapter 6. Simon had been awake since before dawn, hyper-aware of every sound from the room across the hall. He'd heard her moving about near midnight, the scrape of a chair at 2, the creak of floorboards at 4. Either Lady Harriet was as restless as he was, or she was plotting his demise. Given their interaction last night, both seemed equally likely. He dressed in his own clothes. His practical wool trousers and linen shirt felt like armor after yesterday's borrowed finery. He was a country doctor, not a gentleman. Last night's charade had only emphasized the vast gulf between his world and hers. The knock at his door came just as the servants' bells began ringing for Christmas morning. "Dr. Ashford, sir?" A young housemaid stood in the corridor, wringing her hands. It's Betty, sir. She's taken ill, and Mrs. Fairfax thought you might. I'll come immediately. Simon grabbed his medical bag, grateful for something useful to do. What are her symptoms? Fever, sir. Started in the night. She's been working so hard for the Christmas preparations, and now she can barely stand. Simon followed the maid toward the servants' stairs. As they passed Lady Harriet's door, it opened. I'll accompany you, she said, already dressed in a practical morning gown, carrying a small cloth bag. I have willow bark tea. If she's feverish, it will help. Simon stared at her. She looked different this morning, less the society diamond, more the intelligent woman he'd glimpsed beneath the facade. Her hair was simply arranged, and she wore no jewelry. This is a servant's quarters, Lady Harriet. Hardly appropriate. Oh, spare me the propriety lecture. She fell into step beside him. It's Christmas morning. A girl is ill, and I have medicine that can help, unless you'd prefer to stand here arguing while her fever worsens. The maid looked between them uncertainly. Lead on, Simon said curtly, though he found himself fighting a smile. Lady Harriet, in her determined mode, was rather compelling. The servants' quarters were warm but cramped, and Betty lay on a narrow bed, her face flushed with fever. Simon examined her quickly. Elevated temperature, swollen glands, clear signs of exhaustion. It's not serious, he announced. Overwork and exposure to the cold. She needs rest, fluids, and something for the fever. The willow bark, Harriet said, already preparing the tea with hot water from the kettle on the hearth. Her movements were practiced, efficient. My grandmother's recipe. Well, she claimed it was hers, but I suspect she stole it from her housekeeper. Betty tried to sit up. But miss, there's so much to do. The Christmas feast will proceed perfectly well without you, Harriet said firmly, pressing the cup into the girl's hands. Drink this, all of it. The Duke and Duchess will be far more upset if you collapse in the middle of serving pudding, Simon added. Lady Harriet is right. You need at least 2 days of complete rest. Betty's face crumpled. But it's so boring just lying here. And on Christmas. Harriet tilted her head thoughtfully. Can you read, Betty? Yes, miss. The Duchess insists all the staff learn. Excellent. Harriet smiled conspiratorially. I'll have someone bring you the latest Lady Midnight novel. It's deliciously scandalous, all about a governess who discovers her employer is secretly a pirate. Betty's eyes widened. The one where she gets kidnapped to his ship? The very same. Though between you and me, I suspect she wanted to be kidnapped. No one accidentally ends up in a pirate's cabin that many times. Simon found himself watching Harriet with unexpected warmth. She was kind to the maid, treating her like a person rather than furniture, and her casual reference to Gothic novels suggested she read widely beyond medical texts. After ensuring Betty was comfortable and leaving strict instructions with Mrs. Fairfax, they walked back through the main house together. The Christmas decorations looked magical in the morning light. Evergreen garlands, red ribbons, candles waiting to be lit. That was well done, Simon said quietly. The willow bark and the novel. Basic human kindness hardly deserves praise, Doctor. In my experience, many of your class wouldn't have bothered. She stopped walking, turning to face him. My class? You mean the same class that includes Diana, who ensures all servants learn to read? Or Charlotte, who personally tends sick tenants? You have an unfortunate habit of making sweeping judgments, Dr. Ashford. She was right, and he knew it. I apologize. Do you? Or are you simply being polite? Before he could answer, the breakfast gong sounded. We should go down, she said, but neither of them moved. They stood in the morning-lit corridor, too close again, that dangerous magnetism pulling between them. Harriet, Lady Harriet, she corrected, but without yesterday's venom. We're not friends, Doctor. No, he agreed. We're definitely not friends. Something flickered in her eyes, heat or hurt, he couldn't tell. Then she swept past him toward the breakfast room, leaving him to follow in her wake. The Christmas breakfast was an elaborate affair, even by Rothbury standards. The entire party had assembled, everyone in their finest morning dress. Simon felt conspicuously plain in his simple attire, but Diana greeted him warmly. Dr. Ashford, how good of you to attend Betty this morning. Mrs. Fairfax told me you and Lady Harriet were both wonderfully helpful. Several heads turned at this. Lady Pemberton's expression soured. Harriet, you visited the servants' quarters? Someone was ill, Mama. It seemed the Christian thing to do on Christmas morning. Before her mother could respond, Jacob Livingston stood, raising his glass. "If I might have everyone's attention?" As a small token of appreciation for the Duke and Duchess's hospitality, I've prepared miniature portraits of several guests as Christmas gifts. He began distributing small wrapped packages. When Harriet opened hers, she gasped softly. Simon, seated across the table, had a clear view of the miniature. Livingston had captured something extraordinary. Not just Harriet's beauty, though that was evident, but the intelligence in her eyes, the slight, defiant tilt of her chin, the suggestion of a smile that hinted at secret knowledge. It was Harriet as she truly was, not the ornamental version she presented to society. "It's remarkable," Harriet said quietly, "though I think you flattered me greatly." "On the contrary," Livingston replied, "I paint what I see." The challenge was capturing that particular expression, like you're thinking something terribly clever that you can't say aloud. Simon couldn't look away from the portrait. This was the woman who'd annotated medical texts, who diagnosed her own injury with anatomical precision, who'd just spent her Christmas morning tending a sick maid. The real Lady Harriet Pemberton. Their eyes met across the table, and he saw her flush slightly. She knew he was seeing her, really seeing her in that portrait. "Perhaps," the Duke said jovially, "we should have Mr. Livingston paint all our guests, create a gallery of the great Christmas storm of 1823. "An excellent notion," Diana agreed, "though I think some of our guests have already created enough memorable moments without needing portraits." Her eyes twinkled as she looked between Simon and Harriet. The conversation turned to other topics, but Simon remained distracted by the miniature Harriet had set beside her plate. Such a small thing, yet it had shifted something fundamental in his perception. After breakfast, as guests dispersed to various Christmas activities, Simon found himself alone with the portrait's subject in the library. She was reaching for a book on a high shelf, favoring her injured ankle. "Allow me," he said, reaching over her to retrieve it. For a moment they were pressed close, his chest against her back, his arm extended above her. She smelled of lavender and something uniquely her. He felt her breath catch. "It's a book of carols," she said unnecessarily as he handed it to her, "for the evening singing." "Harriet, don't." She turned to face him, the book clutched against her chest like a shield. "Whatever you're about to say, just don't." "You don't even know what I was going to say. Something inappropriate, I'm sure. You have that look." "What look?" "The one that makes me want to do inadvisable things." The admission hung between them, shockingly honest. "Such as?" His voice had gone rough. She lifted her chin, that same defiant angle Livingston had captured. "Things that would ruin me. Things that would prove every gossip right about improper educated women. Things that—" The library door burst open. Lord Henley stood there, cheeks flushed with cold. "Lady Harriet, there you are. We're organizing sledding parties, and I was hoping you might." He noticed Simon and frowned. "Dr. Ashford, still here, I see." "The roads remain impassable," Simon said evenly. "Yes, well, Lady Harriet, might I escort you to the hill? The view is magnificent." "Her ankle," Simon began, "is much improved, thank you, Doctor." Harriet smiled brilliantly at Henley. "I would love to watch the sledding, Lord Henley. How thoughtful of you to ask." She took Henley's offered arm, but at the door, she glanced back at Simon. The look said everything. "This is why we can't. This is the gulf between us. This is reality." Simon stood alone in the library, the scent of lavender lingering, the memory of her warmth against him still burning. Tomorrow was Boxing Day. The storm couldn't last forever. Soon the roads would clear, and he would return to his practice, his patience, his proper place. But watching her leave on another man's arm, seeing the portrait's knowing smile in his mind's eye, Simon realized an uncomfortable truth. He didn't want to go back to his proper place. He wanted her. The lady who was brilliant and kind, sharp-tongued and tender, completely inappropriate and absolutely perfect. He was, he realized with sinking clarity, in terrible trouble. Chapter 7. Harriet watched from the window as the house party transformed the snow-covered lawn into a battlefield of flying snowballs and shrieking laughter. Diana had organized sledding on the hill, and even now, Lord Henley was pulling Lady Whitcomb on an improvised sled made from a tea tray, both of them laughing like children. Her ankle throbbed, genuinely this time, thanks to yesterday's foolish attempt to walk normally during Christmas service. Pride had always been her particular weakness. The door opened behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. She developed an unfortunate awareness of Dr. Ashford's presence, as if the air itself changed when he entered a room. "Shouldn't you be outside, pelting people with snow?" She kept her voice light, disinterested. "I'm sure Lord Henley could use reinforcements." "I needed to check on Betty." His footsteps approached, stopping a respectable distance away. "Her fever's broken. How fortunate." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything they weren't discussing. The kiss that hadn't happened, the admission in the library, the way they'd carefully avoided each other all through Christmas dinner. "What are you reading?" His voice held forced casualness. She held up the novel, Lady Midnight's latest, the one I promised Betty. "The Pirate's Captive Bride?" He read the title with obvious disdain. Such elevated literature. "Not all of us require medical journals for entertainment, Doctor." "Clearly, though I'm surprised a woman of your intelligence wastes time on such nonsense." Harriet snapped the book closed. "Nonsense? Have you read it?" "I don't need to read it to know it's filled with swooning heroines and ridiculous melodrama. How marvelously judgmental of you." She opened to a random page. "Listen to this prose. The sea crashed against the ship's hull with primordial fury, echoing the tempest in Valentina's breast as she faced her captor. That's rather good imagery." Simon made a sound suspiciously like a snort. "Primordial fury? Tempest in her breast? It's purple nonsense. It's emotional and evocative. It's overwrought drivel." He moved closer, looking over her shoulder at the page. Good God, does he really call her his treasure beyond measure? At least he expresses feelings, unlike certain emotionally constipated medical men. "I express feelings perfectly well." "Oh yes, your ankle requires rest is positively Shakespearean in its passion." He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound did unfortunate things to her insides. "Would you prefer I speak in overwrought metaphors? Your ankle, like a wounded dove, requires the gentle ministrations of—" "Stop." But she was fighting a smile. "You're terrible at this." "Thank God for that." He gestured to the book. "Read me more. I need entertainment while the others freeze themselves silly." "You just said it was drivel." "Entertaining drivel. Come now, what happens to poor Valentina and her primordial tempest?" Harriet found herself reading aloud, deliberately emphasizing the most ridiculous passages. Simon's commentary grew increasingly absurd. Medical analysis of the pirate's fevered brow, diagnostic concerns about Valentina's frequent heart palpitations. "She faints entirely too often," he observed. "Possible anemia. The pirate should be concerned." "The pirate is the reason she's fainting, you dolt." "Ah, causation rather than correlation." They'd somehow ended up seated across from each other at the small game table, the book between them like a peace offering. "We should play something," Harriet said suddenly, "unless you're afraid of losing to a woman." "Chess?" He was already reaching for the board on a nearby shelf. "Though I should warn you, I was Edinburgh champion in my college days." "How terrifying. I shall endeavor not to weep when you destroy me." They set up the pieces in companionable silence. Harriet played white, opening with king's pawn. Classical, safe. Simon responded immediately, his knight jumping out, more aggressive than she'd expected. "Interesting," she murmured, considering the board. "Already reconsidering your challenge?" "Hardly." She moved her bishop. "Just noting that you're not as predictable as I assumed." Disappointed? Intrigued. The word hung between them, loaded with meanings neither acknowledged. They played in intense silence for several moves, the only sounds the click of pieces and the distant laughter from outside. "You're good," Simon admitted as she neatly trapped his bishop. "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not. You're brilliant at everything you attempt." The compliment came out matter of fact, which somehow made it more devastating. "It's infuriating." "My brilliance infuriates you?" "The waste of it does." His next move was vicious, threatening her queen. "You could be doing so much more than hiding behind terrible novels and empty conversation." "Could I?" She saved her queen but sacrificed a knight. "Where exactly would a woman practice medicine, doctor? Which hospital would welcome me? Which patients would trust me?" "There are ways. For men. There are ways for men." She captured his rook with perhaps more force than necessary. Check. He studied the board, his brow furrowed. She found herself watching his hands, strong, capable, gentle when treating patients. Dangerous thoughts. We should make this interesting, he said suddenly. A wager. What stakes? If I win? He looked up, eyes dark. You answer one question, truthfully, completely. Her pulse quickened. And if I win? Same for me. It was dangerous, monumentally stupid. She should refuse. Agreed. They played with new intensity. Every move felt weighted with meaning. Harriet found herself leaning forward, studying patterns within patterns. Simon matched her focus, his concentration absolute. She was going to win. She could see it. 3 moves ahead, maybe 4. His king was vulnerable, and he hadn't noticed the trap she'd set. Check, she said softly. He examined the board, looking for escape routes. There were none. Checkmate in 2 moves, she added helpfully. Damn. But he was smiling, that crooked smile that made her stomach flip. Well played. My question, she said before she could lose her nerve. Yesterday in the library, what were you going to say before Lord Henley interrupted? The smile vanished. Harriet. Truth, doctor, you wagered. He was quiet so long she thought he might refuse. Then, quietly, I was going to say that you're the most remarkable woman I've ever met, that your intelligence amazes me, that hiding it is a crime against nature. He paused. And that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that first day on the ice. The confession hung between them like a physical thing. Harriet forgot to breathe. Your turn, she whispered. What? Ask me something. Fair is fair. You won. I don't get a question. I'm giving you one anyway. He leaned forward, close enough that she could smell his soap, see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. Do you feel it too? This madness between us? Yes. The word escaped before wisdom could stop it. God help me, yes. They sat frozen, the chessboard between them like the last barrier of propriety. His gaze dropped to her lips. She found herself leaning toward him, drawn by invisible threads. Harriet, he breathed, this is a terrible idea. The worst. We should stop. Absolutely. Neither moved. The space between them crackled with possibility. Just 1 more inch and the door burst open. Lady Harriet, we've built the most magnificent snow. Oh. Lord Henley stood in the doorway, dripping snow, his cheerful expression shifting to something harder as he took in their proximity. Harriet jerked back. Lord Henley, how wonderful. You were saying about the snow? But Henley's gaze had fixed on Simon with unmistakable hostility. Dr. Ashford, still inside, I see. How dedicated. Lady Harriet's ankle required monitoring. Simon's voice was carefully neutral. Of course. How fortunate she has such attentive care. Henley moved into the room, deliberately positioning himself between them. I actually came to bring you hot chocolate, Lady Harriet. The Duchess is serving it on the terrace. Might I escort you? That's kind, but my ankle. I'll assist you, of course. That's what friends are for. His emphasis on friends was pointed. Unless the good doctor objects? It was a challenge, plain as day. Simon stood slowly. Not at all. Lady Harriet should enjoy the festivities. He bowed formally. If you'll excuse me. He left without looking back. Harriet watched him go, her heart racing from admissions that couldn't be taken back. Shall we? Henley offered his arm. She took it, because what else could she do? But as he helped her to the terrace, chattering about snow sculptures and sledding races, all she could think about was Simon's confession. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. The terrible truth was, neither had she. And that, more than any scandal or impropriety, was the real danger. Chapter 8. Simon had been avoiding her all morning. It was cowardice, plain and simple, but after yesterday's confession over the chessboard, he couldn't trust himself near Lady Harriet Pemberton. Every time he caught a glimpse of golden hair or heard her laugh from another room, his resolve weakened. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Why had he said that? And worse, why had she admitted the same? Dr. Ashford! Diana's voice pulled him from his brooding. Perfect timing. We're organizing the 12th night tableaux vivants and need all hands. Before he could protest, she'd swept him into the portrait gallery where the house party had assembled. Harriet stood near the windows, sunlight turning her hair to gold, directing footmen in hanging gauze draperies. She wore a morning dress of deep blue that made her eyes even more striking. Lord Henley hovered at her elbow like a particularly persistent fly. Lady Harriet believes we should recreate classical scenes, Henley was saying loudly, though I've suggested something more, contemporary, perhaps a scene of English victory at Waterloo? How subtle, Harriet murmured, not looking up from her list. Nothing says Twelfth Night like military conquest. Simon bit back a smile. Even trapped in Henley's company, she couldn't help her sharp tongue. Dr. Ashford, Henley's voice held that edge it had acquired yesterday. Come to assist with the decorations? How democratic. The Duchess requested my help. Simon kept his tone neutral. Of course, you're quite the Duke and Duchess's pet, aren't you? Must be novel, being welcomed above your station. The words hung in the air like a slap. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Lord Henley, Harriet's voice could have frozen the Thames. Dr. Ashford is a guest here just as you are. Hardly the same thing, my dear. Some of us belong in such settings. Others are merely temporary curiosities. Simon's hands clenched, but before he could respond, Diana intervened. Speaking of curiosities, Lord Henley, I believe Lady Whitcomb was looking for you. Something about partnering for the tableau? Henley left reluctantly, shooting Simon a look that promised this wasn't over. Insufferable man, Diana muttered, then brightened. Now, Harriet, dear, I need you to help sort through the costume trunks in the old gallery. Dr. Ashford, would you assist? Some of them are quite heavy. It was transparent matchmaking, but Simon found himself following Harriet to a smaller gallery filled with dust-covered trunks and forgotten paintings. The space was dimmer, more intimate, with only weak winter sunlight filtering through tall windows. They worked in tense silence at first, pulling out elaborate costumes from various past entertainments. Harriet held up a Roman toga with a skeptical expression. I cannot imagine Gabriel in this. I cannot imagine anyone over the age of 12 willingly wearing it. She laughed, that bright, genuine sound that made his chest tight. You'd be surprised what people will do for Twelfth Night. Last year, Lord Pemberton dressed as Neptune. The beard was made of actual seaweed. God help us all. They continued sorting, the silence growing easier. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same silk scarf, and both froze. Simon, she said quietly, still holding one end of the scarf. About yesterday. We don't need to discuss it. Don't we? She turned to face him fully. You said things. I said things. We can't just pretend. Yes, we can. He pulled his hand back. We must. You know as well as I do that this is impossible. Why? The single word held frustration and something else. Hurt? Because you're a doctor and I'm an earl's daughter? Yes, exactly that. Did you not hear Henley? I don't belong in your world, Harriet. I'm a curiosity, a temporary amusement. Stop it. She stepped closer, eyes blazing. You're worth 10 of Lord Henley. Worth isn't measured by character in your world. It's measured by titles and estates and income, none of which I possess. I don't care about those things. You should. He was close enough now to see the gold flecks in her green eyes, smell her lavender scent. Your mother would never approve. Society would shun you. You'd lose everything. Maybe I don't want what I have. Her voice dropped. Maybe I want something real. Someone who sees me for who I truly am. Harriet, you do see me. She moved closer still, close enough that her skirts brushed his boots. The medical knowledge, the sharp tongue, the refusal to be decorative. You see all of it, and you don't run. I should run. His voice was rough. God knows I should. But you won't. No, he admitted. I won't. The air between them crackled. She tilted her face up, and he was lost. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing her soft skin. She leaned into his touch with a small sigh that destroyed his last defenses. This is madness, he whispered. The best kind, she breathed back. He kissed her. It was nothing like the careful, chaste kisses of his limited experience. This was fire and demand, years of propriety exploding into desperate need. She made a sound against his mouth, surprise or pleasure, then her arms were around his neck, pulling him closer. He pressed her back against an ancient cabinet, his hands tangling in her hair, pins scattering. She was kissing him back with equal fervor, all her sharp wit transformed into pure passion. One of his hands found her waist, the other braced against the cabinet, boxing her in, and she arched against him with a soft moan that nearly undid him. Harriet, he gasped against her lips. We shouldn't. I know. But she was pulling him back down, her fingers curling in his cravat. I don't care. The second kiss was deeper, hungrier. Somehow his coat was off. When had that happened? And her hands were on his chest, burning through his shirt. Her hair had come completely undone, golden waves cascading around her shoulders. He buried his face in it, pressing kisses to her neck that made her gasp his name. What in God's name is going on here? They sprang apart, but it was too late. Lord Henley stood in the doorway, his face purple with outrage. Behind him, Sophia Sterling and Jacob Livingston looked mortified. "Lady Pemberton!" Henley bellowed. "Lady Pemberton, come at once!" "Henley, wait!" Simon started, but it was too late. Lady Pemberton appeared in the doorway, took in the scene. Harriet with her hair down, lips swollen, Simon in his shirt sleeves, and screamed. Actually screamed. "You beast!" She flew at Simon, hitting him with her reticule. "You've ruined her! My daughter is destroyed!" "Mama, stop!" Harriet tried to intervene, but her mother pushed her aside. "How dare you lay hands on my daughter? You common tradesman, you've compromised her beyond redemption." More people were gathering, drawn by the commotion. Diana pushed through, her face pale. "What on earth? Oh dear! Get him out!" Lady Pemberton shrieked. "Remove this nobody from this house immediately. He's destroyed my daughter." "Mama, we should discuss," Harriet began. "There's nothing to discuss. You're ruined, completely ruined. And by a country doctor." Lady Pemberton's voice dripped venom. "No decent man will have you now. You've thrown away everything for this tradesman who isn't fit to black your boots." "He should be forced to marry her," Henley declared loudly. "If he were a gentleman, honor would demand." "If he were a gentleman, this never would have happened," Lady Pemberton spat. "A gentleman would know his place, but no," she rounded on Simon. "You thought you could reach above yourself, seduce an earl's daughter? You've ruined her, and you cannot even make it right. A country doctor." She laughed bitterly. "I'd rather see her live as a spinster than married to you." Simon's jaw clenched. Every word was true and cut like a knife. "You're right. I cannot make this right. A marriage between us would only compound the scandal. I'm nobody, a country doctor with no fortune, no connections, no future to offer. Lady Harriet deserves better than—" "Don't you dare!" Harriet stepped forward. "Don't you dare decide what I deserve." "Your daughter is right about one thing, Lady Pemberton," Simon said quietly. "I'm not fit to marry her, which is why I'll leave immediately." "You should have thought of that before you pawed her like an animal." Henley spat. Simon's fist connected with Henley's jaw before conscious thought could stop it. The Lord went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. "Simon, no!" Harriet grabbed his arm. But the damage was done. He'd assaulted a peer in front of witnesses. He looked around the gallery, at the shocked faces, at Lady Pemberton's fury, at Diana's desperate attempts to calm the situation. Then he looked at Harriet, her hair wild, her eyes bright with unshed tears, her lips still swollen from his kisses. The most brilliant, impossible woman he'd ever known. He'd ruined her. "I'll leave immediately," he said quietly. "The roads are clear enough now." "Simon, don't." Harriet started. "It's for the best." He couldn't look at her. If he did, he'd weaken. "Lord Henley is right. I don't belong here. I never did." He pushed through the crowd, ignoring Diana's calls, Harriet's protests, the buzzing gossip already starting. He had to leave. Now. Before he made things worse. Before he gave in to the voice saying that she was worth any scandal, any price. Because that way led to her destruction, and he loved her too much for that. The realization stopped him cold in the hallway. Love. He was in love with Lady Harriet Pemberton, and that's exactly why he had to leave. Chapter 9. Simon had made it exactly 3 villages from Rothbury Abbey before turning his horse around. 3 villages, 12 miles, far enough that his pride should have kept him going, close enough that her memory pulled him back like a physical tether. He'd spent the first night at a dismal inn, staring at water-stained walls and telling himself he'd done the right thing, the noble thing, the only thing that could save Harriet from a life of genteel poverty and social exile. By the second morning, his noble resolve had crumbled into dust. What if she didn't want to be saved? The thought had haunted him as he'd tried to eat breakfast, failed, and ordered his horse saddled instead. He'd made it another 2 miles toward London before the memories ambushed him, Harriet demolishing his diagnosis with anatomical precision. Harriet reading that ridiculous novel with dramatic flair. Harriet's face when she'd said, "God help me, yes," to his question about the madness between them. Harriet pressed against that cabinet, her hair coming undone, kissing him like the world was ending. His horse seemed unsurprised when he turned around. Now, approaching Rothbury Abbey in the late morning light, Simon felt like the world's greatest fool. He had no plan, no idea what he'd say, no right to be here at all. But he couldn't stay away. The stable boy who took his horse looked shocked. "Dr. Ashford, we thought you'd gone to London, sir. Change of plans." Simon's voice came out rough. "Is the family at home?" "There's a wedding, sir. Miss Sterling and Mr. Livingston. Started just few minutes ago in the chapel." A wedding, of course. Life had continued without him, the world spinning on while he'd been wrestling with his conscience in a shabby inn. Simon walked toward the chapel, drawn by voices raised in him. He should leave. He had no invitation, no right to intrude on their happiness. But his feet kept moving, pulling him toward the small stone building covered in winter ivy. He slipped in during a prayer, trying to be invisible. The chapel was packed, all the house guests crammed into the small space, creating an intimate warmth despite the December chill. Sophia Sterling stood at the altar in cream silk, glowing as she gazed at Jacob Livingston. The artist looked stunned by his good fortune, as if he couldn't quite believe she was choosing him. Simon knew the feeling. His eyes found Harriet immediately. She stood in the back corner, partially hidden behind a pillar, wearing gray, the closest thing to mourning that wouldn't cause gossip. Her mother stood guard beside her, like a dragon hoarding gold, but Harriet's face, she looked hollow, beautiful still, but dimmed somehow, as if someone had blown out the light behind her eyes. He'd done that. In trying to save her, he'd hurt her worse than any scandal could. The crowd shifted, forcing him to move closer to the pillar, closer to her. Lady Pemberton was focused on the ceremony, her jaw rigid with disapproval. She didn't notice as Simon edged behind the pillar, close enough to Harriet that he could smell her lavender scent. She went absolutely still. "You're here," she breathed so quietly he almost missed it. "I couldn't." His voice broke. He cleared his throat, tried again. "I made it 3 villages? 3 whole villages?" There was a ghost of her old wit there. How heroic. "I'm a fool. Yes, I hurt you. I'm sorry. Are you?" The vicar was speaking about love now, about choosing each other despite all obstacles, about forsaking all others. Simon watched Sophia and Jacob join hands, saw the certainty in their faces despite the whispers their match would cause, an American artist and an English gentleman's daughter. "I tried to be noble," he whispered, "to do the right thing." "The right thing for whom?" Harriet's voice was barely audible. "You left me to face them all alone. My mother, the gossips, the ruin. You decided what was best for me without asking what I wanted." She was right. God, she was absolutely right. "What do you want?" he asked. "Now you ask?" But her hand moved slightly, hidden by the pillar and her skirts, until her fingers barely brushed his. "I want a partner, not a protector. I want someone who sees me as an equal, not a treasure to be safeguarded. I want—" "For better or for worse," the vicar intoned. "For richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health." Harriet's fingers intertwined with his, hidden from view but blazingly real. "I want you," she whispered, "despite everything, because of everything, you impossible, infuriating, brilliant man." Simon's throat closed. He held her hand like a lifeline, feeling the calluses from her secret studying, the ink stains that never quite faded, the strength in those deceptively delicate fingers. "To love and to cherish," the vicar continued, "forsaking all others." "I love you," Simon breathed, the words escaping without permission. "I've loved you since you destroyed my professional pride with perfect anatomical terminology. I love your brilliant mind and your sharp tongue and your terrible taste in novels. I love—" "Shh!" Her fingers tightened on his. "People will hear. Let them." Sophia and Jacob were kissing now, sealing their union while the chapel erupted in celebration. In the chaos of congratulations and movement, Harriet turned to look at him fully for the first time. Her eyes were bright with tears. "You came back. I'll always come back." He was still holding her hand, not caring who saw. "If you'll have me, I have nothing to offer but a country practice and a lifetime of medical debates and—" "Simon," she stopped him with his name. "I don't want what you can offer. I want you." Lady Pemberton's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Harriet, we're leaving. Now." "No." The single word rang out clear and strong. The entire chapel seemed to freeze. Lady Pemberton's face went purple. "I beg your pardon? I said no, Mother." Harriet stepped forward, still holding Simon's hand, pulling him into view. "I'm not leaving, not with you." Gasps rippled through the wedding guests. Sophia, still at the altar, watched with wide eyes. "You dare! After everything, this man ruined you." "No," Harriet said firmly. "He freed me. From pretense, from hiding, from being nothing more than an ornament." She looked at Simon. "I choose him. I choose a life of purpose over propriety. I choose love over reputation." "Then you are no daughter of mine." Lady Pemberton's voice shook with rage. "So be it." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Diana stepped forward, elegant and commanding. "Well then," the Duchess said calmly, "she'll need somewhere to live. Gabriel?" The Duke moved to stand beside his wife. "Our estate physician position is still open, Dr. Ashford. It comes with a house, large enough for a family. And you'll need an assistant," Diana added, looking at Harriet. "Someone who understands anatomy and can help with the female patients who prefer a woman's care." "This is outrageous," Lady Pemberton sputtered. "This is love," Diana corrected. "And if you cannot see your daughter's worth beyond her social standing, then you don't deserve her." Harriet was crying now, openly, still gripping Simon's hand. He pulled her closer, not caring about propriety or scandal or anything beyond the woman in his arms. "Marry me," he said urgently. "Not because of scandal or duty or anything, but this. I love you. I need you. I want to spend my life arguing about medical procedures and reading terrible novels aloud and, yes." She laughed through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." He kissed her then in front of everyone, in the chapel where another unlikely couple had just pledged their lives together. Kissed her like she was air, and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, the chapel had erupted in varied reactions: shock, disapproval, but also surprising support. Sophia was applauding. Jacob was grinning. Diana looked supremely satisfied. "The banns," Harriet said breathlessly. "We'll need to read the banns." Or Gabriel suggested with amusement, "We could follow Mr. Ramhat, Livingston's example from last year. Gretna Green is only a day's ride." "Don't you dare," Diana swatted his arm. "We're having a proper wedding. Small, perhaps, but proper." She looked at Lady Pemberton, who stood frozen with rage. "You're welcome to attend, Lady Pemberton, or not. Either way, your daughter will be married from Rothbury Abbey with all the dignity she deserves." Lady Pemberton swept from the chapel without another word. Harriet watched her go with sadness but no regret. "I'm sorry," Simon murmured. "Don't be." She turned back to him, eyes bright with determination. "I meant what I said. I choose you. I choose us. I choose a life where I can use my mind, my knowledge, my skills, even if it means losing everything else." "You're not losing," Diana interjected. "You're gaining. A husband who sees your worth, a home where you're valued, a purpose beyond decoration. And," Gabriel added with a grin, "friends who support you, though I draw the line at reading those Gothic novels Harriet loves. A man has limits." Laughter rippled through the group, breaking the tension. Sophia approached, still in her wedding dress. "Welcome to the Scandal Club," she said warmly. "It's not such a bad place to be." As the wedding party dispersed, making their way back to the house for the wedding breakfast, Simon and Harriet lingered in the chapel. "3 villages?" she asked again, amused now. It felt like 300. He touched her face gently. "Every mile away from you was agony." "Then don't leave again. Never," he promised. "Though you realize what you're choosing? A life of rural medicine, modest means, social whispers. A life of partnership," she corrected, "of using my knowledge openly, of working beside someone who values my mind as much as my appearance." She smiled, that brilliant smile that had first undone him. "I'd say I'm getting the better bargain." "Harriet, though we are definitely getting rid of those Gothic novels," he teased. "Never," she laughed. "In fact, I plan to read them aloud to you every evening, with dramatic voices." "God help me." "Too late for divine intervention, Dr. Ashford. You're stuck with me now." "Thank God for that," he said, and kissed her again. Chapter 10. Harriet stood before the altar in her mother's wedding dress, the one thing of value Lady Pemberton had sent via footman that morning, along with a terse note. At least look respectable for your choices. The ivory silk was 23 years out of fashion, but Diana's seamstress had worked miracles, updating the sleeves and removing excessive ruffles. Harriet thought she'd never looked better, or perhaps that was the joy making her beautiful. Ready? Diana asked, holding a small bouquet of winter roses and holly. I've been ready since he walked into that chapel 2 days ago. Harriet took the flowers with steady hands, or perhaps since he accused me of malingering. Diana laughed. The best marriages often start with conflict. Trust me. The chapel was nearly empty, just their small circle of conspirators. Miss Mitchell had delayed her departure to attend, standing with Lord Harrington, who'd become an unexpected ally. Gabriel stood as Simon's witness. Charlotte and William had arrived that morning with knowing smiles. Diana wiped away tears she'd deny later. But it was Simon waiting at the altar who made her breath catch. He wore his own clothes, simple, well-made, utterly him. No borrowed finery, no pretense, just the man who'd seen through all her facades and loved what he'd found beneath. She walked herself down the aisle, no one to give her away because she was giving herself, choosing this with eyes wide open. You came, Simon said softly when she reached him. Where else would I be? Anywhere respectable. Respectability is vastly overrated. She handed her bouquet to Miss Mitchell and took his hands. I prefer interesting. The vicar, the same one who'd married Sophia and Jacob, cleared his throat. Dearly beloved. Harriet barely heard the familiar words. She was too focused on Simon's face, the way his hands trembled slightly in hers, the absolute certainty in his eyes. The ring, the vicar prompted. Simon produced a simple gold band. It was my mother's. She was a physician's wife too, said it was the hardest and best job she ever had. Now it will be a physician's assistant's ring, Harriet corrected. Partner's ring. He slid it onto her finger. With this ring, I thee wed. With my body, I thee worship. With all my worldly goods, such as they are, I thee endow. All your medical texts? She teased softly. Especially those. Then I'm wealthy indeed. When the vicar pronounced them married, Simon's kiss was tender but brief. Later, he promised against her lips, when I can do it properly. I'll hold you to that, Dr. Ashford. As will I, Mrs. Ashford. The name sent a thrill through her. Not Lady Harriet anymore. Mrs. Ashford, a woman with work to do. The wedding breakfast was intimate and perfect. Gabriel made toasts that had everyone laughing. Charlotte recounted her own scandalous wedding journey. Diana presented them with a trunk that made Harriet gasp. Medical supplies, the Duchess explained. Everything you'll need to establish your practice, including. She pulled out a leather bag. The bag was beautiful, practical, and embossed with gilt letters, H. Ashford, medical assistant. Harriet's eyes filled. Diana, every professional needs proper tools. Simon stood, raising his glass. To my wife. Partner, Harriet corrected. To my partner, he amended, eyes warm. Who will undoubtedly diagnose circles around me, terrorize me with Gothic novels, and make every day an adventure I never saw coming. To adventures, everyone echoed. As the afternoon wore on, guests began departing for London or their estates. The house party was ending, but Harriet felt like life was just beginning. That evening, in the cottage that would be their home, small but perfect, with room for a surgery and a study, Simon finally kissed her properly. No interruptions, he murmured against her mouth. No scandals, just us, she agreed, pulling him closer. Later, much later, as snow began to fall again outside their window, Harriet traced lazy patterns on her husband's chest. Regrets? He asked. He stiffened. What? I should have sprained my ankle on the first day of the house party. Think of all the time we wasted. His laugh rumbled through her. Harriet Ashford, you are incorrigible. Mrs. Dr. Ashford, she corrected. And yes, completely incorrigible. You should probably examine me for it. His hands began a decidedly non-medical exploration. This could take extensive study. I'm an excellent research subject. The best, he agreed, and proceeded to prove it. Easter Sunday, April 1824, Ashford Cottage, Rothbury Estate. The pounding on the door came just after dawn. Simon was already awake. These days, he barely slept past sunrise, too aware of the warm presence beside him, the subtle changes in Harriet's breathing that suggested she too was feigning sleep. Doctor! Mrs. Doctor, come quick! It's Mary's time! Harriet was already moving, reaching for her medical bag before fully opening her eyes. 4 months of marriage had given them an efficient rhythm. She dressed while he gathered supplies, both ready within minutes. "Third baby," Harriet said as they hurried toward the tenant cottages. "Should be straightforward." "Nothing's ever straightforward with the Wheelers," Simon reminded her. "Remember the eldest boy's simple, broken arm? Don't jinx this birth." But when they arrived, Simon knew immediately something was wrong. Mary Wheeler was pale, exhausted, and the local midwife looked terrified. "Been laboring all night," the midwife whispered. "Baby won't come. It's turned wrong." Simon watched Harriet take charge with the calm authority she'd developed over these months of practice. No longer the hidden scholar, but a confident healer, she examined Mary with gentle efficiency. "Frank breech," Harriet announced quietly to him. "We need to turn the baby." He knew what she was thinking, the texts she'd memorized, the diagrams she'd studied. In London, with their superior facilities, they might attempt more drastic measures. Here, they had only their hands and knowledge. "Tell me what you need," he said simply. "Hold her steady. This will hurt." Watching Harriet work never ceased to amaze him. Her hands moved with precision learned from books, but executed with instinct. She coaxed the baby to turn, murmuring encouragement to both mother and child. Mary screamed. The midwife prayed. Tom Wheeler paced outside like a caged animal, and Harriet never wavered. "Almost," she breathed. "Come on, little one. Turn for me." The baby turned. 20 minutes later, a healthy girl's cry filled the cottage. Mary sobbed with relief. The midwife crossed herself repeatedly. "Saints preserve us," the midwife gasped. "I've lost 3 mothers to breech births, but you saved them both." "We saved them," Harriet corrected, but Simon could see the victory shining in her eyes. Outside the cottage, Tom Wheeler fell to his knees, tears streaming down his weathered face as he grabbed Harriet's hands. "You saved them, both of them. We were wrong about you, Mrs. Doctor. The whole village was wrong. You're a blessing, scandal or no scandal." As they walked home, Simon noticed Harriet wince slightly, pressing a hand to her lower back. He'd seen that gesture increasingly over the past weeks. "Your back's bothering you again." "It's nothing, Harriet. It's not nothing." She stopped, turned to face him with that particular smile that meant she was about to upend his world. "It's about 3 months of something, if my calculations are correct." The world tilted. Simon stared at her, processing the words, the meaning, the impossible joy of it. We're. Yes. He kissed her there in the lane, not caring who might see, pouring all his wonder and terror and love into the embrace. His wife, his partner, carrying their child. When they pulled apart, both were crying and laughing. "A baby," he breathed against her hair. "Our baby. Who will grow up watching both parents practice medicine? No hiding, no pretense." They continued home to find a letter waiting on the doorstep. Simon recognized Lady Pemberton's distinctive hand immediately. Harriet almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. "I have heard of your growing reputation among the tenantry," Simon read aloud. "While I cannot approve your choices, I am not entirely without maternal feeling. The enclosed is for any future children's education. They should not suffer for their parents' decisions. Do not mistake this for approval or invitation to correspond. Your mother." A substantial bank draft fell out. "She's trying," Simon said generously. "She's bribing future grandchildren she doesn't even know exist yet." But Harriet folded the draft carefully, one hand touching her still flat stomach, though the timing is rather ironic. "Should we write back about—" He gestured to her midsection. "Absolutely not. Let her stew in her pride a bit longer." "Respectability?" She laughed. "God, I hope not. I prefer interesting." That evening, as Easter bells rang across the valley, Simon sat in their surgery watching Harriet document the Wheeler birth. Her careful notes, her precise drawings of the turning technique, all of it would help them next time. The village had accepted them now, scandal and all. The women especially sought Harriet's care, trusting her in ways they'd never trust a male physician alone. "Read to me," he requested. "Something dramatic and ridiculous." She glanced up from her notes. "After I finish this." "You said that an hour ago." "Medical documentation is important, Simon. So is literature. Terrible, purple literature that makes my ears bleed." She laughed, finally setting down her pen. "The Pirate's Secret Bride? Perfect." She began reading in her most dramatic voice, one hand unconsciously resting on her still flat belly. Simon pretended to work on tomorrow's tinctures, but really he was watching her, his wife, his partner, the mother of his child, the woman who'd turned his orderly world into beautiful chaos. His eyes blazed with the fire of 1,000 suns, she read. He should see a physician about that. Simon? Yes, I love our life. He crossed to her, kissed her temple, breathed in the scent of lavender and herbs that always clung to her now. Even the Gothic novels? Especially the Gothic novels. Then I prescribe more of the same, daily doses for the rest of our lives. Doctor's orders? Doctor's orders. And as Harriet returned to her dramatic reading, punctuating the purple prose with medical commentary that made him laugh, Simon reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. A sprained ankle on a frozen pond, a misdiagnosis that revealed hidden brilliance, a Christmas scandal that had transformed into Easter joy. Outside, spring had fully arrived at Rothbury. Inside, 2 doctors, for that's what they were, whatever society said, built their future one patient, one day, one shared life at a time. The Gothic novel was truly terrible. Harriet's medical notes were impeccable. Their baby would arrive in autumn. And Simon Ashford, country doctor and unlikely husband to the most brilliant woman in England, had never been happier. The end. We hope you have enjoyed this presentation of the Bluestocking's Christmas Scandal, written by Violet Sinclair, narrated by Isadora Blythe.